welcome to our subscribers. We are talking with Jim Elvidge. Thank you for tuning in and thank you for being here. We've had a very interesting discussion in the first segment about the simulation and about the programming of our reality. And one very scary aspect that we talked about was the fact that all of these new technologies that are coming in, especially with the nanotechnology, could potentially lead to manipulation on the most fundamental levels on how we perceive the world and reality. And one thing that popped up there, Jim, was I wanted to ask you if you know if there actually is regulation ongoing in regards to these new technologies. I mean, potentially we could end up in a situation where private interests or whatever, or even a government, rogue or not, could actually spearhead the development of some of these technologies and then actually go in and manipulate reality on these fundamental levels, and that's very scary. Do you know if there's any kind of laws or regulation going on right now in regards to these technologies?
No, not too much. I have heard that that there is an effort underway for some regulation in the nanotech industry, and actually, from what I read, it was more so than has been in other industries. Interestingly, I participated in a kind of an not an experiment, but a group of people at the Museum of Science in the city that I live in, where they explored some of the potential dangers of nanotech and asked people their ideas on whether they thought it needed to be regulated and so forth. And what I found kind of interesting was that the experts there were not necessarily believers in the kind of the gray goo scenario or the
right.
The nanobot scenario. They were more thinking in terms of how various materials behave differently at nanoscale. So some things may be more poisonous than they are carbon. There's some evidence, for example, that buckyballs and some of the different constructs of carbon at the nanoscales can actually be poisonous to your system, whereas carbon itself, of course, is not.
Mm.
So things like that, and things like weaponization, potential weaponization of the technology is certainly a scary scenario.
Like new forms of biowarfare, basically, and things like this.
Yeah, exactly. Now, I don't know if you've ever read anything by the author Neil Stephenson.
No, I'm not.
He wrote a book called The Diamond Age, which was actually the first time that I encountered some of these ideas of nanotech and how it might be in the future, and really explored the swarms of nanobots concept, and as I recall, the way it was depicted was that there were people who could generate nanobots for surveillance, and they may be sort of invisible most of the time in the air, and then there were opposing organizations that may try to destroy those, so they end up having nanobot wars, and this all goes on in the space around you that you're sort of unaware of. So it's really kind of an interesting concept.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it sounds like, I guess what we also must kind of take into the picture is that even though that this might be ongoing on the smallest levels, if we ever develop the technology to, in regards to how we manipulate down on the nanoscale, that would potentially also mean that we could build very large machines or robots, for instance, but they are, basically created they're printed out from, a three-dimensional printer or what have you, and that could be very sophisticated, very, perform certain things that we generally would think normal materials today, for instance, wouldn't be able to handle or be able to do. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. In fact, the whole idea of nanotech really opens up some other possibilities of programmed realities. So, if I may, I'd kind of like to just describe a couple of those.
Right.
And a nanotech pioneer, J. Storrs Hall, came up with the concept of utility fog, which is basically the idea that you could have a swarm or millions or billions of nanobots that have certain capabilities. And those capabilities are that they can perhaps link their arms together. They can generate electromagnetic radiation at visible light ranges, different colors.
Mm-hmm.
And they're able to act under program control. So they're, forming essentially a large hive network. So with that scenario, which he and other futurists think are definitely possible, perhaps in the second half of this century, with that scenario, what you can have is you could be somewhere and these devices could be in the air. You would never know they're there. They sense that you're coming. They move out of your way. They're totally innocuous. And then under program control, suddenly they could become a wall, or they could form into a sofa or a room. And theoretically, if they can form into a room, you could form an entire reality out of them.
Right.
So the utility fog as a reality concept is one that really should be considered as well. And then you mentioned the idea of sort of molecular assemblers, ways of building up macroscopic objects.
Right.
There's been a big debate about that, whether or not it's possible, and I think the people who say it isn't possible don't think in terms of the ability to self-replicate and pass your instructions on to something else.
Yeah.
So if you have a blueprint for something that you're trying to build, and that nano device understands the blueprint, it can create another nano device that and pass that information on to it, and they can create geometrically or exponentially, more of these nano devices, and then start to modify them under program control to perform different functions. Eric Drexler, in his book Engines of Creation, describes how a rocket engine could be built that way, for example. So, again, if you can build a rocket engine, you could build a room, you could build a city, you could build a universe, perhaps. It's just a matter of scale.
And I guess also it would be a little bit of the limitation would be on where you kind of get the material from and what kind of material it is, because I mean, as far as I know at this stage, it is not possible to build, so to speak, whatever you want to out of. I mean, you still must have certain types of the raw material because they're still building them out of atoms, right?
But I guess I would ask the question: what is raw material? When you break down an atom into its constituents and break down those into their constituents,
right.
Continue to do that. At some point, do you have something, or do you just have information?
Well, you're right there, because I mean, potentially you could take, I guess, sand from the desert and actually rearrange the molecules in the atoms and do what you want to do with it. Is that what you're saying? Well, no. What I'm saying is, if what matter is information, and there's a lot of evidence to support that idea as well. Right. Laws of thermodynamics that apply to information theory. If matter ultimately is just composed of information and rules, then that information can get generated programmatically without anything. Well, you're right. Huh. I mean, maybe the reason something feels hard is because it is, programmed to be connected together in such a tight fashion that it feels hard to us. Right, it's only perceived as being hard. Right. When you dig into it, most of any atom is empty space. Yeah. And ultimately, what is matter but possibly information? Huh. Well, that's a absolutely fascinating concept. I mean, that opens up the, well, again, it kind of says that potentially everything is possible. We're just right now, I guess, in the kind of middle of the road, and we don't know how how much is going to be possible until we progress a little bit further forward here, so to speak. And that actually takes us into the other thing that I wanted to discuss a little bit, and that is about the singularity. This is the concept that Ray Kurzweil, of course, talks about, and I guess that he claims with his recent book that it is indeed near. We are near the singularity, and there's different ways to approach this. One, of course, is that we will, through the help of developing smarter and smarter computers, like AI or something similar, that these machines or robots actually will help us to progress, and after a certain stage of development, things will progress so quickly that we basically will not know how the next, second or millisecond or whatever you want to term it, what is going to happen, or how the progress or what the change will be. So the question is, Jim, have you, researched a little bit about the singularity, and if so, does it kind of connect with your concept a little bit?
Yeah, it does. And actually, I have read Ray Kurzweil's books, and I find the whole concept really fascinating. And basically the premise, his premise is largely also due to Moore's law and the exponential nature of it, and extrapolating that out and kind of seeing where we are in 30 years. I do differ in a couple ways. In one way is that I think most of the futurists view a machine as having the ability to have consciousness.
Right.
And I'm not quite there yet. I mean, I feel like I understand artificial intelligence. I understand the concepts behind it, but is something ever truly conscious? I still tend to believe in the soul, and that we have that there's something behind us, something that drives us, and that we have some free will. Because ultimately, if you believe that a sufficiently complex computer is conscious, then you have to kind of work back and say, well, a computer half that complex is half as conscious, and a tenth as complex as a tenth as conscious. And when does consciousness start? Ultimately, you're just talking about shades of gray and levels of consciousness, down to the point where a single flip-flop or a single electronic device that stores one bit has some bit of consciousness. That just doesn't make any sense to me.
Okay, well, I would, one approach to that idea is that actually, I guess everything in our universe, or the universe itself, actually is constructed by consciousness, meaning that behind it all, behind every atom, behind every law, and basically everything we see, there is spirit, there is consciousness there. This is only a matter of, can we build something, so to speak, in order for a more, I don't know how to phrase this, but something potentially could incarnate, so to speak, into a body, so to speak, or even if it's mechanical or made of flesh. And I mean, that's just one way of looking at it. What's your thoughts on that?
I have a gut feeling about that, and of course, I have no idea of whether or not that's true or not, but
right.
I mean, it comes from reading about some of these experiments that have been done on brains. I remember reading one, I can't put my finger on it now, but somebody experimented with the brain of a salamander, and they mashed it up and sliced it and diced it, and they put it back, and the salamander was able to recover its previous functions as a salamander, which just